Hello, I'm Dr. Patta Radhakrishna. I'm a surgical gastroenterologist from Chennai, and today with me is Dr. Amrita Varshini, who's just completed her MBBS in 2024. And the interesting thing is that I've been in conversation with many seniors over the past many years, and the first time I'm talking to somebody who's just fresh from internship. The reason why I thought I should have a conversation with her is, one, I've seen her speak earlier on a couple of occasions. I was quite impressed. And secondly, I think it's a very common comment by most doctors. That includes me, which I passed MBBS more than 40 years since 40 years ago. And then the present generation is different. They think of work-life balance and they want to take life easy. And always trying to compare with the past generations. Actually, there's an eye-opening statement by Dr. Gomati Narasimhan, as a famous transplant surgeon, in one of the recent webinars of Women in Medicine. She said the present generation is different, and it's their right to be different, and we can't compare to what it was years ago. And I think that's a very, very logical statement. So I thought I'll probe a little deeper into this issue with Amrit Varshini. What do they call you in class, school, home?
So in school they call me Amrita, and at home they call me Varshini, but either is fine.
Okay, I'll call you Amrit.
Yes.
Amrita, where were you born and where was your education, schooling?
So I was born in India, in Chennai, but then when I was just 2 months, I moved to the UK. And then after I reached 12 years of age, my family decided to move back to India. And so I've been in India ever since.
Okay.
And I did my schooling in Chennai and I did my MBBS in Madurai.
By the way, Dr. Amit Varshini's parents are very eminent, in the sense that father is an eminent urologist and mother is a very eminent gynecologist, and you are lucky to be born to them.
Very.
And you had your later schooling in Chennai, and at what point did you decide that you will take up medicine as a career? Because quite often, why I ask this is, quite often when children see their parents busy and occupied, and they don't want to take medicine up as a career. But what made you think, or did your parents push you into it?
No, I'm very lucky to have parents who never forced me to do anything. And so I was just debating many options. I thought of doing law because I like to talk, and I thought of doing music because I like to do music. And then something happened in my 11th standard where I went to this one of my mom's programs. So she was opening a unit that was focusing on screening for cervical cancer. And I saw Dr. Rela speak there. And just the whole event, as well as his speech and the the just the inspiration that all of the people there gave me, and like the way that they were so humble even though they had done so many great things, that was so inspiring to me. And their attitude to helping those in need, that just was something that resonated very deeply with me. So that's when I decided, okay, I want to do medicine.
Oh, wonderful. And you've done medicine from Velammal Medical College in
Yes.
Madurai. Have you stayed in hostel in your schooling?
No. That
So this is the first time was it easy?
Well, initially, no. I don't think it's easy for anyone initially. But after these 5.5 to 6 years, I think it was the best decision I could have made.
Hmm.
Lifelong friends, unforgettable experiences, and you really feel like a part of the place and the city and the
Mhm.
college because you lived there.
Right,
So it was a great experience for me. I have no regrets.
right. Now, something about your undergraduation in itself. Yours is a class of how many students?
It's around 150. plus or minus. Yeah.
Okay, how many girls out of that?
Oh, we were majority. So if there are like 3 columns, 2 columns were girls. Around 50 to 60 boys, maybe.
And the rest are girls?
Yeah.
90.
Yes, almost 90. Yes.
Now, this is a strange thing because I was discussing this aspect. We were discussing that particular meeting that when I did MBBS, out of class of 65, 7 were girls. And that was the average number around that time. And now it is majority.
Yeah.
70% almost, because usually what happens when it is come to medical school, there'll be 2 men's hostels, 3 men's hostels, only 1 women's hostel, the volume wise. Yours must be sort of very dominant. Even other classes, your junior senior class also will have similar number of girls, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know what impact will it have on life in general, because we were in a situation where all our girls are very precious because they're very few, and all the boys went round and round, and it's like a swayamva. The reverse must be true in your
Uh,
situation.
Somewhat, I think, like in our case, they had more choice. Maybe
Yeah.
they'd pick a few girls, which would,
Okay.
yeah. But what happened was that you're right. So the hostels probably anticipated more guys and less girls.
Mm.
So what happened is we would have like 3 people per room, even till final year CRRI. Whereas the guys had like 2 people in a room, 1 person in a room, big rooms,
Really?
because they just had less people. So this was the
Well,
situation.
this is the positive point of that. I
Yeah.
didn't realize it, because even during our time, of course, the numbers are many, and especially in a central institution like JIPMO, when the hostels are good and there was no issue. Now, how was your anatomy, physiology? Because anatomy, how many people per table?
25. Yeah. My parents gave the same reaction.
25 per table.
Per table, yeah.
Then what do you get to see?
You get to see it. You may not get as much hands-on as possibly people who have, less students per table. And there would definitely be a little bit of scuffle for who gets to dissect.
How do you manage?
We didn't. The teachers did.
What do they? How do they do?
They focus mainly on the more theoretical parts and making sure everyone gets to see, like takes turns in seeing. But definitely, dissection was a skill that it's just not possible with that less number of bodies per people. Obviously, dissection is a skill that was not picked up as effectively as it could have been with less people. But the theory part was fine, and they put a lot of effort to kind of make sure all 25 were listening. And then they gave us time to interact among ourselves so we could discuss the same theory that we had learned. So the theoretical part obviously didn't get hit. And visually we were fine, but definitely the practical aspect of dissecting, I think that got a bit lost.
Oh, interesting. We were 8 per table actually. In that
I've
we thought
heard.
there were
Too
many.
much.
Yeah, we thought there were too many. We thought at least 4 per table would be ideal.
Yeah.
Actually, the hand is such a small area with.
No.
Now, the thing I'm interested in knowing is, as far as anatomy teaching is concerned, first thing is I found it very difficult. One, because the books are so big. The Grey's Anatomy, the print is so small and too complicated. And actually, all through my schooling, I do a lot of guesswork, and even history. I had bit of. Here, you can't do any guesswork. You have to, you know, you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah.
It's tough actually, and with so many structures, so many bones. Did you find it difficult? Did you find it easy, or how was it?
Very difficult, especially anatomy. But I found that me, as well as a lot of other people, like anatomy the most, in the sense that it gives that feeling of being a doctor. So when you're going fresh into MBBS, you have all this like sort of, I'll say, TV impression of being a doctor, and that is usually a surgeon. And so, anatomy, everyone says anatomy is like the first step to becoming a surgeon, right?
Right.
So it's kind of that fresher's enthusiasm helps you overcome the difficulty that is learning anatomy practically. I didn't read Grace, and many people I know didn't read Grace. We read B.D. Chaurasia.
Ah.
Yeah. And so,
How can you imagine three-dimensional reading B.D. Chaurasia? You'll have, because B.D. Chaurasia, the book got published the year we were doing MBBS. We waited till the exam, and then that book came, and we got it by heart, and we are the first ones. And I think it is a line diagrams. You have a red one artery, a blue one vein, a yellow one nerve.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, same. I think it helps with like baseline understanding, like what structures are there. That first initial understanding it helps with. And then we were also given a Netter's handbook.
Right.
And that helped a little bit more with the 3D visualization. I think for my generation, a big advantage we have is internet. So on the net and on YouTube, you have so many videos which is like 3D visualization of this, 3D visualization of that, this app, that app, and there are so many videos and apps. And the downside is that sometimes it can get overwhelming and you don't know where to search. But definitely the plus side is that there's very few times where you can say, oh, I didn't find this, or it's not there in the book. Like it's not there in the book becomes almost like a moot excuse because you have so much resources at your literal
No,
fingertips.
but there are two things to it. One is in the modern method of teaching. I understand modern method of teaching anatomy is also through some machinery in which you can do a 3D visualization. Do you have that?
No.
Your college or anything which is similar to that? Because when it comes to all the apps you're talking about, do the teachers tell you use this app and or use this resource and learn from there? Where you get guidance because randomly you'll be trying something, and what you read your neighbor might not be reading. How did you make out? I mean, where is the guidance?
So this is kind of like, although I'm sure that everyone thinks our generation's like very forward in technology and everything's at your fingertips. A lot of it is sort of, there is still a big gap between what we're being taught and how we learn and what actually helps us understand. So that gap is still there. So if you look at the teaching that happens in the classrooms and even in the dissection hall, although dissection hall is better because you can see it, just going with anatomy, the teachers are still teaching probably like how they taught you, sir, where they are just saying, okay, this is the bone, this attaches to this attaches to that, done, and then you just try to understand what you can of that, and then you go back, and then one useful source is seniors. So you ask the seniors, I'm not able to understand this. What app did you use? What YouTube video did you watch? Or what helped you learn this? That is one set of people who give a good guidance. And then the other thing is just talking among your peer group. But definitely that exists. One person will learn something from somewhere, another person will learn something from somewhere else. And so that sort of difference in understanding definitely existed. Those who took extra efforts to really try to understand what they were reading, were able to understand it better. And those who were just like, okay, I'll just try to remember as much as I can. I only have to get through this exam, then I don't need to use ANAT again. There were people who thought like that as well. So they just remembered as many diagrams as they could and went to the exam. So there is that difference in understanding because the way the students pick things up and then the way things are being taught, there is a big mismatch in that.
No, I also understand that the newer method of teaching or learning anatomy and physiology is more clinical, more applied, in the sense that I was told that surgeons teach anatomy.
No, I mean, not in my college. But maybe in other colleges. And also, I will say I am the batch where I think the last batch to not have CBME syllabus.
What is that?
So that's I think a new syllabus introduced by NMC, where I think there is a lot more hands-on, lot more clinical, it's more centralized. They are the ones who suggested skill lab in all the colleges, simulation teaching. So
Was there simulation lab in your college?
I mean, I didn't use it, but there wasn't any when I was a student. But I do understand that it's been brought into my college now as
That
per
includes learning anatomy,
guidelines. I don't know. I have to
right?
ask my juniors.
So, was applied anatomy taught to you?
So it was not taught in syllabus, it was taught based on the teacher. So some teachers would teach us the applied anatomy, and that definitely helped. Always it helps to learn why you're learning something. Like, why should I care about, I don't know. Obviously, femoral artery is really important, but when you're freshly learning it, you're like, okay, what is femoral artery? Why should I be bothered about this structure? And then when a teacher teaches you the importance, the applied anat, why you should know where it lies, all of those things, I still remember there'll be a pink box in Chaurasia that will be just applied anat, and that was like the most interesting thing to read. Like if someone gets stabbed in the thigh, there it's very dangerous because all the major vessels are there. Things like that. So teachers who taught like that, um, that helped us a lot. But it was I don't think it was something that was like you definitely need to cover this.
So,
You
not
know?
all teachers taught.
No, not at all.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Now, for example, in retrospect, suppose if there's a femoral artery, would you go back into the internet to see what is the treatment of femoral artery thrombosis?
Yeah.
Or did you watch videos, or then you will understand why this is important.
Yeah, I found BDC a helpful book because it did include a lot of clinical aspects as well, or applied aspects as well, or at least an interesting fact here and there. And I was someone who went back and watched videos, but it was more because I was lost and I couldn't understand it, rather than I would say out of a interest to learn more. It was the interest to learn basic. Did not reach the level more. I was still struggling with basic. So I think I don't know. Maybe the more higher achieving students went back and learned extra. But for me, just to learn where is this femoral artery, I'm not having orientation. I think with limb it was okay actually. Or upper and lower limb, the orientation was easier. But then when you came to like abdomen, it's even more important to have a 3D visualization. That's when it got really tough. So that was when I looked into like videos and things like that.
Well, suppose if you say find out a video, will one of your friends will share it with you, or some seniors will tell you what are the resources which you should look into? Was there that sort of help?
It wasn't like an official help. It wasn't like there's a
Ah.
board of seniors who you go to with
Mm.
anecdotes. It's not like that.
Mm.
Though I have an interesting point to add on that. But if I found something useful, I would definitely tell my friends.
Mm.
My friends would tell me. I remember before the university exams in our class group, people would send short notes, videos, whatever. So there was that sense of we should help each other out.
Mhm.
And our seniors were very nice, so they also helped us out a lot. Um, so we realized it would be nice to have somewhere official where you can go to. So the physiology department in our college was very hands on, and when I was an intern, the students club really picked up. And so we would have like divisions in the students club where it's like an academic wing, a research wing, and you can go to them with doubts related to that. Like
Right.
in the academic wing, you can go to students who are struggling can go and ask help there, especially people who have come from Tamil medium if they're struggling with the language, things like that. And then for research, people who wanted to get into research would come to us.
Were any physicians, have they taught you biochemistry or physiology?
No, so the people who taught were people who are like have done PG in physiology, PG in
Oh,
biochem.
not general medicine. No, no. Don't you think that is more apt? Because when at least once in a while, when clinicians come and teach you, they have the practical application. They'll say, because that's one thing which we lacked very, very seriously. Because when we found all the subjects difficult, and it was very difficult to link one to the other. And when it really came to clinical medicine, we had problems. What I understand, the present day teaching is making that easier, so that everywhere and anywhere, you try to correlate with the clinical medicine.
It's definitely improved. and it's improved more. So I saw, I think my college was relatively new when I went. The first batch graduated. So
Mhm.
as I've been through the years in my college, I've really seen it pick up in these kind of
Right. So
regards.
there are no post graduation in your college that
Yeah,
you joined.
now after I joined, I think when I was third year or fourth year, then their first PGs came.
Oh, but that's a huge disadvantage, I should say,
Yeah, in its own
because
way.
most of the teaching comes from the postgraduates, because
Now,
especially the clinical part of it. Because when it came to general surgery, general medicine, bedside clinics are taught to us by MD and MS postgraduates. Because and they used to take classes late night, evening. Did you have those evening sessions where the first year MD or second year MD PG taught you how to look for heart sounds and stuff? The evening clinics.
so evening clinics was a very unofficial thing and a very, I would say, contested thing, I think, before my internship. Because, we were just starting with getting a better patient flow.
Hmm.
So, only one patient in that ward would have MS. And the final years have to come because they have MS in the exam. And the third years want to come because they want to learn before they go to final year.
Hmm.
The second years would come out of, first clinical eagerness. And so at one point there will be a sort of fight who gets to, because the patient will only talk to three people. After the third set of people, the patient's like, you keep asking me questions, don't, no more. So
Really?
yeah.
But that's an interesting thing. Patients refuse.
Yeah, nowadays lots of patients reviews. I think it probably happens everywhere, but with government colleges, like purely government colleges, there'll be enough patients to go around, sort of, so that problem would never be there. Whereas with Velamal, when it was starting out, it was just sort of increasing the patient flow. But I think this problem settled when I went to internship because the patient flow just increased a lot. They made a lot of things free. There was more popularity, and so the wards were more full. So I think that problem slowly came down. But evening clinics was a very voluntary thing. If you wanted to go and learn, you learn. You were encouraged, obviously, by your clinical supervisors, but it was something we did. And because of the lack of PGs, we would have to catch a senior who wanted to teach us. They would teach us. We would teach whoever in our batch was there who wanted to learn. So it was a very unofficial sort of community based learning, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, in effect, if you have to suggest improvements in teaching anatomy, physiology, and those basic subjects, what improvements would you suggest now?
So I do like a lot of the aspects that have come, I think, with the new syllabus, where skill lab and all of that has been set up. You mentioned a box where they have like the 3D structures. I think that would help a lot for anatomy. I understand it's hard to have as many cadavers present, but with modern technology, you can almost simulate a virtual cadaver. We have that option now. So definitely trying to incorporate those modern methods would probably help students. Our physiology department was very good in that regard, where I remember they did a lot of co-curricular activities like role plays, model making, things like that, and that it really encouraged students to look at it from a different aspect. Like you did a role play about Alzheimer's, and you really understood not only the symptoms but how it affects the family around them, which is what medicine is about. Or they did model making, and someone would have done a really good model making of renal physiology, and they will never forget that. And because we saw that, we'll also never forget how renal physiology works. So trying to it doesn't have to be every day. I don't think it's possible every single day when you have a 1 hour class to do innovative things every day, but once a month, once every 2 months, having something like this really helps, if nothing, to spark the students interest to learn and to give them a hint as to the relevance of the topic, or the simplicity of it if it feels complicated. And definitely small group teaching is more of the way. This 150 rows of people and then the teacher in the front, I don't think that's a thing that works anymore, where the teacher's lecturing lecture classes. And I remember being on a panel that was discussing this, where lecture classes are almost obsolete now, right? So it is much better for small group teaching to happen. I remember Dr. Seturaman sir saying about flipped classes, that is definitely something.
You had flipped classes?
No, we didn't have flip classes, but we had
Physiology, whatever you had, is some sort of flipped class.
yeah. It was. I was gonna say there was like an attempt at least small group teaching / something like flipped classes, but it wasn't like a thing. It was something they did in the time lateral to their prescribed academic time. But definitely, I think something like flipped classes would help a lot because it really motivates the students to do the basic reading and come back and learn hands-on / practically or with clinical relevance, and I think that helps. So yeah.
See, one of the worst things I faced as an undergraduate is everybody's brilliant. They read very little and get very good marks, and I used to suffer. In spite of the fact that I was sort of good in school, this, that, and the other, suddenly you go to medical school, everybody's good. Did you go through that?
Definitely. I was. I will. I don't want to say I'm not a good student, but I'm definitely not someone who can read and remember things. I have a difficulty in remembering things. I love to read. I love to understand. I love to know things in a very like things I'm interested in. I like to read for fun almost. But when I came to exams, I was horrible because my dad would always say, "You have no exam technique, no exam
Right.
technique." So that is a thing that I think people don't realize.
Your parents must be guiding you from time to time.
Time to time, but it's more of a general advice of,
Okay.
you should study or.
It's not that your mom comes, stays with you during exams and
Oh,
stuff.
never. Never. Not in a bad way. I also used to say, there's no need. I will read with my friends. I prefer to read with friends. When I read for exam, she's stressed out, I'm stressed out. It's just better to read with
How
your
was
friend
food?
group.
Was all right?
No. No, I'm saying it on camera, but that's fine. It was terrible.
Really?
Terrible. Yeah, the worst thing about Velamal was the food in the hostel. It was really
I mean, that's what everybody says about their colleges. But our food was good, actually, I should say, in retrospect. But didn't you people try do something about it?
Yeah, every year we would complain. Every year they'd change the menu. First 1 week would be okay, and we'd be like, "Oh, is this a turning point?" And then after that, it'll dip down.
Then how do you manage? You get food from elsewhere.
So initially it was not allowed.
Mm.
Not that we listened, but it was not allowed officially. And then slowly, they loosened the rules a bit. So it would be a mix. Sometimes we would make Maggie in a kettle, usual things. Sometimes we would adjust with the food. Sometimes we would order out. But food not being good was a big complaint in hostel till I left. Till I left, I don't think that changed. Yeah.
See, the other thing is, my home, the lights are off when I was a child by 9 o'clock. Here, all the lights are on till sort of 2 a.m. in my hostel, and people used to read like mad. You people did that?
It was a really mix. I would say like there's a lot of conversation that goes about reading and our generation, my generation, reading and studying. And I would say like it's not uniform. It's not a monolith. So lights were on at 2 a.m. Some of us were studying. Some of us were not studying. Some of us were talking till 2 a.m. I have been that someone who was talking till 2 a.m. So I understand. And definitely this issue of like everyone around you is extremely smart or studies very well, very sharp. That trouble was definitely there, not just for me, but for many people in coming into medical college. And I will say we came in this sort of like midway college where we're not a government, we didn't get a government seat, but at the same time, it's not like we didn't get a seat. So we had two quotas, government, management, and a big driving force was, PG government la no, like, we should prove that we are just as good as the government kids. So there was that driving force was there, and so people would study like crazy, like you said. I am someone who tried to study hard, but have a small attention span, so I used to struggle. Definitely, I was a group study person, but I like to learn. I think this is the part where it gets a bit tricky. Some people like study to clear the exams or because they want to do well in exam, and some people study out of interest. And I've realized in medicine it's really hard to score if you just study out of interest. You need to have that knowledge of how they are correcting the papers, things like that. It's not a MCQ, right? It's a written exam. And so that aspect also came in. Me and other people have studied in CBSE. In CBSE, if you write 5 lines, 5 marks. Here, if you write 5 lines, they won't even give you half a mark. So that difference, which board you studied in, where you studied, your learning style, and what you learn versus what they test in the exam. That was, I think, the biggest struggle for me personally. So yeah.
Did you have any mentor during your undergraduation
Mm. Mentor,
or
of
mentors?
officially no, but unofficially, yeah. And as the years went on, they sort of really developed into my mentor. I was someone who was very big on research, sir, more than
Hmm.
exam, academic, anything. I
Hmm.
love to do research.
Right.
I started actually just so my roommate wanted to do a project, so I said okay, I'll also try doing a project. And then my HOD of physiology at the time, she became a great mentor for me throughout the years. I don't think it was an official, like assigned mentorship, but as I took more and more interest, she also wanted to help me through it, and so I ended up doing really well in that field. And that showed me how effective a mentor is.
Right.
If you have someone who believes in you
Hmm.
first, that itself can take you a long way. And
Hmm.
then if that someone who believes in you knows the kind of path that you're going down or the obstacles you'll hit, that will take you even further.
Right.
So that is when I realized, I lucked out, to be very honest. I got lucky and I was able to meet someone who, mentored me through my UG, and that too in research. When it came to academics, it was a freestyle kind of. I would just hit whatever techniques I could and see if it would get me through the exams or help me understand. So I definitely do think one more thing that could be considered is, proper mentorship for the students. Again, I had a good relationship with my seniors because I played sports, so they would help me out with exam resources. But that didn't happen for everyone because anti-ragging committee was very fierce in my college. There was barely any ragging on the girls' side. The advantage is there's no ragging, but the disadvantage is that bond that happens usually
Right.
between juniors and seniors that comes with ragging was not there for everybody.
Right.
I got it through other means,
Right.
but I realized that doesn't, not everyone will want to play sports or do things. So
When someone says that present generation takes life easy, and they are more into work life type of is it that your generation spend more time without books than with books?
Oh, that's a difficult question because I don't think everyone in my generation is the same. I think a lot of things affect the various decisions they make. Definitely, like someone who is a first graduate from their family, they'll have, I think, less gripe about a work life balance and things like that, just because they want to get their foot in the door, and that's their main concern.
Hmm.
Or they people who are worried about things like supporting their family through a crisis, they're definitely different. I was lucky in the sense that Velamal had a big range of students, like people who are from you know doctor families or business families or whatever, and then people who are the first graduates or financially struggling or whatever. So you could see the difference. Some of them, they had a lot to prove, they had a lot to do, but some of them took it quite lightly. You know what I mean? I think though there is a general trend where we see how the previous generation worked, and for me, the toll it takes on their health, and you wonder, like, when is it too much? You can work to an extent, and then surely that can't be good for you or the patient. There just is a general sense of, can it be done differently? Is there a smarter way to do it? Is there a faster way to do it? Is there a way to do it where I'm not permanently exhausted? I think rather than saying that they don't want to work, they want to see if there is a different way to work. um, that is the positive way of looking at it. Of course, there will be people who just don't want to work. Let's say they are on one extreme, but I think majority just want to see, like, okay, me working 48 hours, is that really what's best for the patient and for me? And in my opinion is that, if you work 48 hours, maybe you can do it, it's humanly possible, but what is your caliber of thinking at the 48th hour? Are you as sharp as you were on hour 4? Probably not. So is it better to take shifts, take breaks, have some element of work life balance? Would that make me a better doctor? Is there a smarter way to do this with, machinery? Is there something we can automate, like this note taking or this, record keeping? Can that be done on a system where it saves me time? I think that lateral way of thinking is there.
See, at the end of 1.5 years, many of us in the class, in the hostel, gone through what's called depression. Suddenly we feel lonely in spite of so many people around, and upset, and somehow we lose confidence. I understand girls go through it much more than boys. What was your sort of compensatory mechanism? What was protecting you from all those?
For me,
For all of you,
for all of us,
for you also.
yeah. I think so. The
Was
thing
it
with
there?
hostel, yeah, some people seem permanently happy, but I'm sure that's just my perception of them, and they had their own struggles. But I think the main thing is that for a lot of people, it's their first time away from home, and it's you're constantly with a set of people, and a lot of people go through what I call a second year syndrome. And I told all my juniors this also, that you'll get a bunch of people in your first year, and then in your second year you'll realize I actually don't connect with these people as much as I thought. And then full friend dramas will happen, friend groups will break up, and then you'll form a new set of people who you are friends with more understanding. But definitely hostel is a way to create a very strong bond, because you have to get along with them because you live with them, and you eventually learn to be more tolerant, accepting, and like gel with people better. So definitely that second to that 1.5 years, I think, is the second year, right?
Yeah, right.
So that second year is where it happens,
So
where
it's,
you're
it's
like,
common. It's not
it's common,
only-
it's
Ah,
almost foolproof,
really?
when my siblings and like my cousins and all, they enter MBBS, I tell them, just be wary, who you meet in your first year. I'm not saying you'll become enemies, but from what I've seen, who you meet in your first year is not who you're always with in your final year. You change, they change, the system and the subject changes you, maybe. And so you'll have clashes, and it'll happen, and that's just part of growing up. However, depression is a whole other thing. So this is like just almost like a second puberty of types. But
Yeah.
the depression can come for a lot of people from feeling like they're not good enough, they're not getting the subject, that and if you're paying a little bit and going, wasting parents' money.
No, but will the college or the hostel authorities identify
No.
these people and help them out?
At least in my time, no. Hopefully in the future, yes. But as of now, there doesn't seem to be much help besides sort of the community help, like someone in hostel seeing you down and helping you out, or a friend being there for you. If you have a good supportive family, இப்பதான் family. I mean, just now only family is understanding, I think, the concept of mental health. For it to come institutionally will take some time, maybe.
Yeah, I think the institution should understand. There's a medical institution
You would think.
that
You
would
would really
understand it.
think.
Yeah.
They have, I will say, like the superficial covering of it, where they talk about it. They're like, mental health can affect you. Do stress free activities, do walking, do yoga. These are coping mechanisms, like you said, compensatory mechanisms, but it doesn't always address the root cause. Some of the kids, they're really struggling to keep up with the subject. And there is just a general assumption that they are lazy and they're not working hard enough, and that is why they're not getting the subject. Whereas, they might genuinely be struggling with coming to terms or understanding it. And then, there is a set of people who take it very hard that they've not fully set in yet,
Right.
don't have a supportive group of people around them. So they struggle a lot, so there is a lot of superficial addressing it, where it's like they hold a mental health seminar, they tell you to exercise or have fun, but they don't actually address the root causes
Right.
that could be behind it. So I think it's not possible also, sir, to be very honest, no matter what generation it is, for the anyone in a position of authority to help as much as maybe they would like to. And that's why it's important to have a strong student body. So if you have a strong student body who can connect with the professors but also connect with the students, that I think would be the most helpful. More than anyone, a student will understand what you're going through because they went through it probably recently.
Right.
So definitely interns or maybe third year students being involved in this would help more, I think, with the issue.
Amrita, I'm sure you must have come across some teachers who are very good and some teachers who aren't.
Mm.
What makes a good teacher and what makes a not so good teacher?
Okay, so definitely the first thing is how they interact with the students, more specifically, like the kind of language that they use, in the sense that some teachers, even though they are good with the subject, they can be very demotivating or discouraging with their approach. I don't know if it's a generation thing or if it's just something that I noticed in my college, but teachers who approach like that, it's very difficult to hear when they speak, even if they are great teachers, because there's so much demotivation or discouragement along with it. Whereas teachers who are, they don't have to be motivating, they just don't have to be demotivating. And I think that is something that I've noticed a lot. I have met very few teachers who are not good with the subject. They are all teachers for a reason, and they do their subject well. But teachers who kind of open with sentences like, நீங்களா படிச்சு என்ன பண்ண போறீங்க, that type of um, tone makes it difficult to connect with the teacher or connect with the subject. And even if you do, you always feel like, okay, maybe I'm not good enough to learn this.
Coming to the good teachers, what is good about them?
So they break down complex concepts simply, and then they interact with the students in a positive way, usually, where they kind of understand where the students are coming from. I remember, I'll take an example, I think that would be better, where we had a very memorable professor in physiology, again, called Dr. Keba. And he would come, he'd always start the lecture with a motivational quote. And then he would say something like, I know it's hard to sit in a 2 p.m. class. It's hard for me to take a 2 p.m. class. So why don't we both work together and we can get this subject done? That collaborative feeling, I think it helps. And then very simply, he would, with flow charts, or like he was teaching Parkinson. So he would put a video of the Ferdinand Gate. And I'll still remember that video. So very clinically applied, very visual, very easy to understand, and give us time to take notes. This is a big thing where you want to take notes in class. You're genuinely interested in the class, and there is running through, and that also makes you lose interest. Okay, now I can't even follow, so why should I listen? That kind of feeling. So he'd give us time to take notes, and then he'd finish the class again with either something funny or motivational, and the class would finish when it's supposed to finish. If it was a 1.5 hour class, it would take 1.5 hours, and he wouldn't try and stretch it to 2 hours. He'll be like, okay, we're done, do some self reading. So I think we're just trying to take it in the appropriate time, being very visual and clinical in your approach, and giving students time to absorb the information, and being as positive or motivating as possible. I think these four things help. And of course, all of this can only be done if you know your subject. So knowing the subject definitely helps. So this is what I would say makes a good teacher.
Some was the internship. Actually, internship was the most fun-filled, the most enjoyable, most learning also.
Yes, that is true for me as well. I think it's true across the board,
Mm.
because you really feel like a doctor, and you actually do things that you thought you would do, when you entered medical college, and then you realize there's 4 years of learning. So there's a lot more hands-on, a lot more responsibility. But I found very interestingly that it's not necessarily the people who were, let's say, the toppers of the class or who studied the best, who were the best interns. So that was something I observed that was interesting, where it's like, just because you know your subject and you read well and you're a sincere student doesn't necessarily make you a sincere intern. In fact, a lot of them seemed more reluctant to work because they wanted time to study for PG exams.
Oh, that's a new thing I'll come to. Before I come to that point, which is very new in this generation, which isn't there during our generation, was, the if you have to do your MBBS again, the non-internship part, will you do it any differently?
Yeah, I think so. Because now that I am in that post MBBS stage where I am actually looking even more at patients than I was in internship. Internship is you're new. You're getting used to being an intern. I think after 1 year, you get used to the jobs that come with it. and you really start to look at patients more from, okay, if I was the lead consultant on this, how should I approach this? And you realize your gaps very, very, it hits you hard. Okay, I have far more gaps than I thought. And definitely the way I read the subject, and I think my interest in the subject would be a lot more, because it is more impactful to me what's at stake.
Right.
It's not that I didn't understand. Of course, you understand what you're reading will impact the human that you're addressing. But because it's hard to understand which, in this 15 books of information, which book or which part is going to help me, is hard to understand, and how to read it in a way that will help the patient. That was something that I struggled to understand. Just mugging up a medicine didn't help. But you really understand. Like Farm, for example, Farm is very boring, to be honest. When you read it, you have to take a lot of impetus to remember all the drugs. But sitting in a clinic and realizing, oh, you can't give this patient this drug because they have this problem, that is very impactful. And I think just the humanity that is kind of taken out in those 4 years when you're doing it with just the books and not much clinicals, that really comes into play post MBBS. And so I would go back and read it in a very different way, I think.
Now, in our internship, all our seniors made sure that we learn procedures. We have hands-on. Like example, we have put a lot of IV lines, then we'd cut venous cut downs, and in general surgery, we have every intern would have done a couple of circumcisions, couple of sebaceouses. Is that practice followed in did you have a log book in which you had to write all these things?
Yeah. And
So-
we had a logbook. Some of us wrote it sincerely, some of us didn't write it
and
sincerely.
somebody monitored the logbook?
Yeah, kind of. But some students, no matter what you monitor, they will do it the way they want to do it.
Right.
So leave that. That's
No.
a separate part. But so I want to just say there are different kinds of interns. So there were ones which I know you'll get to soon, but they wanted to read for NEET PG. That was their main thing. Working was something they had to do, because otherwise they'd be scolded by the consultant, pay would be cut, they'd have get a pay cut kuda illa, extension. We'll get an extension, so they'd go to
There are
work.
occasions.
Yeah, there are occasions, there are people who were mainly worried about that and hence going to work, right? Then the interns who, of course, wanted to learn the hands-on procedure, but don't want to do the major part that comes with being an intern, which is writing notes,
Right.
documentation, discharge summary, which is also part of being an intern. And then, of course, the interns who were, sincere across the board. So this, you can sort of divide the interns like this, So there'll be interns who will read, and then when a hands-on comes, they'll be there. OT, they'll be there. ER, full attendance.
Yeah.
Venflan, I'm there.
Right.
But have to write a discharge summary, have to write a notes, gone. So that this was the kind of thing. And I think again, Velamal had a good patient flow by the time I was in internship, but there was still that element of oh, I don't know, idukapra ippo, when can I see OT again? So
right.
I'm going to go to this OT. You do the discharge summary. So that all fights used to come. So I think learning what it means to be an intern and the different aspects of it came into play there. However, post MBBS, you again realize, okay, documentation is very important, legally, medically, everything. Without the previous patient's records, it'll be very difficult to understand where the patient is in the treatment plan. So this is something I understood.
Now, there's so much emphasis on soft skills, communication skills. Have you been taught specifically these things?
To be honest, I learned this more when I finished MBBS and I went to Apollo Simulation Center, and I went to faculty development course, all of that. That was when, and of course when I was reading for my PLAB 2, PLAB 2 is an OSCE, so there was a huge emphasis. In fact, it was a marked sect, interpersonal skills. So that was when I think I realized the full extent of the importance given to these soft skills abroad.
Right.
Here, there were classes, again, very superficial, but it was not a main thing. It was not seen as a key part of learning. I think the professors and even some of the seniors' belief is that this is just a tick box, and it's not something that is something you need to waste time on.
That's pretty sad.
Yeah, it is, because it is probably a big difference between a good doctor and a
Hmm.
just a theoretically good doctor. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure though. I'm not sure how they're going to incorporate the emphasis of soft skills. So with PLAP 2, there were stations like breaking bad news and things like that, where without soft skill, you can't complete the station. You can't break bad news by saying, I'm sorry, pa, you know what I mean? So you needed to have that approach. So because it was literally embedded in the syllabus, the students who learn it pick it up. Whereas for our exams, that wasn't a thing. It was not like we had a OSCE station where we had to break bad news. So I think you have to embed it in the syllabus for it to have relevance, sadly.
Now, by the time you come to internship, you must have made up your mind as to whether you'll take up general surgery, general medicine, OBGYN, depending upon, some faculty was very sort of attractive in sense that was very good in teaching. Actually, we took up like that because my parents weren't doctors, or I didn't have any siblings who told me that this is what you should do. And actually none of my classmates had that, and suddenly they liked their pediatric posting, and because some teacher was very good. Were you like that?
So I wasn't like that. I'll tell you why also, because I had an idea that I wanted to do this, and then I went to internship and my idea completely changed.
Hmm.
I wanted to do surgery because at the time that was what I was interested in the sense that it was challenging. So I thought, really challenging. I had a tough time with surgery. So that is why I wanted to do it, not because I enjoyed it.
Hmm.
But then I went to my internship posting, and the posting I really loved, I did not want to love it, was OBGYN.
Hmm.
And I had a kind of different problem because my mom is a OBGYN, and
Hmm.
I desperately wanted to not do it because I didn't want to be,
Hmm.
Dr. Meera's daughter, who is also a gynecologist. I didn't want this.
Okay.
And I fought it and I fought it. And then I went to internship, and I had such an amazing time in OBGYN posting. I
Hmm.
had good, and it really is just, this is where you believe in things like fate and, the universe and things like that. It was just set up in a way where it was difficult for me to not like it. I
Right.
got along with my co-interns well. I liked my labor ward sisters. I liked my PGs. Obviously liked the subject, and I liked the professors. I liked the way they handled, especially a couple of the senior professors, the calmness with which they handled. The whole labor room is on fire, and they
Right.
are so calm and handling it so well. And so it was always impossible for me not to fall in love with that subject.
I'm surprised because first time I'm hearing somebody saying that they like the atmosphere, because during
Yeah.
our times all confusion, and we walk like zombies when we are posted in labor room because we didn't see day night, and I mean that's a very very.
We had shifts. I will say that probably helped. Like if you had night labor, you had night 8 p.m. to morning 8 to 9 a.m.
Hmm.
And then you can leave and go and take a rest and come. And it is long, but it's okay. It's
Ours was
like
sort of different.
human.
We are round the clock types.
We did have, we call it 36 hours duty.
Hmm.
But again, because I had good co-interns, and this is where it comes into play, and good professors, I could sort of, if in my 36 hours, I could finish duty and then go take some rest. And then come back 2 to 4, and then the night duty, CRRI would come, and they'd come and handle it.
So you weren't planning for PG NEET during your internship, that
No.
you didn't dedicate time for studying for that?
By then, I had firmly decided to take PLAB, but I did write my PLAB 1 exam in Feb. But for me, the most important part of internship was to learn as much as possible. And I can't. Like, as a person, if there is a work given, my mind won't be at rest until I finish that work. And I hate troubling other people. I don't want to put something on another person's head. So I will go. In fact, I will help other people. I liked being in the hospital. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed talking with the sisters. I like talking with the patients. So that was just who I was, and that's why I approached it. This is a big thing I noticed, but that, people who are like, oh, I have to read for NEET PG, I learned this Venflan. This is just a discharge summary. I don't want to do this notes. You do these notes. Especially, no offense, a lot of guys used to be like this. So I don't know if there's any correlation between that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a big resistance to do sort of the mundane work of intern, which is note taking and all of that.
No, but don't you think it's all important to do all that? It's mandatory, to grow into a postgraduate properly. These
Yes.
things are very, very necessary. That you have to be bedside, you have to be doing night duties, you should be attending to middle of the night some issue and all that stuff. Because quite often, present generation, I've seen that they don't want to do all that. And whenever I write about it, that about doing spending late nights and all that, they think this is criminal. I mean, you shouldn't do that.
Uh, Okay, again, I think the generation is probably divided on this, because I also, in fact, me and my friend group would talk about how night duty is like a rite of passage that every intern should go through.
Right.
And some have gone through internship with barely doing any night duties. I found that extremely fascinating.
Mm.
What are you learning then? In fact,
Right.
night, when everything is going down and there's no consultant, that is when you feel most like
Really
a doctor,
wonderful.
right? So, that's when you really learn what to do in a crisis. And it's like combination of learning soft and hard skill in an acute situation, stuff that you will probably face a lot as a, or rather the TV version of what a doctor is literally that.
Really.
So if you enjoy the field, it's very unlikely that you would. I do agree that should be some humanity. You can't be having 4 night duties in a row. I think that's just not humanly possible. But seeing 1 or 2 night duties a week is fine. It's
Right.
routine, at least until you're a consultant. So this is my opinion, but I'm sure many people differ. There will be people who say, I'm going to do dermatology. Dermatology doesn't have night duty. Why should I do night duty? So I don't know.
That's what
Listen
I
to them.
want to come to. Now, see, people taking up hardworking specialties like general surgery, actually, of late has come down so much. People in radiology, dermatology. Did you see that trend?
Yes, yes. And you can tell from the NEET PG kind of ranking, like
Yeah.
what is the most preferred branch. And it's definitely radio, derm,
When I was
GM.
uh, trying for post graduation, I never thought of anything. I had no idea that radiology is less work and you don't need to do night duties in dermatology. I mean, I'm surprised. Our present generation is so much into it. And the most sought out specialties are these and not general surgery anymore. So much so that in future, the number of general surgeons are going to come down and down and down. It's a
Which is
very,
worrying,
very,
yeah.
very sad situation. So in your batch also, the thought was very much there.
Oh, definitely. But I think it's a very mixed reason as to why general. So if you're talking about just general surgery and not about work-life balance, there's a mix of reasons as to why less and less people want to take general surgery. And I think a big thing is the kind of environment that general surgery ortho has, where it's a very rough and tough environment. At least
Toxic.
toxic is the word I was trying to avoid. Yeah.
No, no. Toxic is different from rough and tough.
Okay, toxic. Yeah, toxic.
But
Definitely.
but I always understood OBGYN is
Yes, I was expecting the same when entering, and to my pleasant surprise, it was not toxic for me. But I had my friend in a different college who wanted to do OBGYN till her internship. Then, when she did OBGYN, she said, I'm never doing that again.
yeah.
That was the worst period of my
So
life.
true that surgical departments are toxic.
Could be for many reasons also. It's easy to blame the departments, but the kind of work that they do, the kind of hours they work, almost thanklessly, could
You're
contribute.
softening down.
They're softening, you feel?
You on them.
On them, little bit, yeah.
Yeah, because I've been in surgery all the while, and I thought it was very sort of happy, sort of.
If it was,
Wow.
I think more people, despite the hours, say, I will say this about my generation is that, when they want to, they will kind of, in generation. Like, if you want to stay up to watch that TV series, you'll stay till 4 to watch that TV series. If you want to talk till 3 a.m., even if you have a bus at 5 a.m., you'll stay up till 3 a.m. So it is all about what you want to do, which I
Right.
think the choice has become more. Definitely, the reasons why people taking medicine have changed, and the passion aspects is a little more. So people who really love surgery, even in my generation, they love surgery despite the toxicity. But for me, even for me, I wanted to do ortho. Not that
Ortho.
ortho. I was advised strongly against it by everyone I know, but I wanted to do it. And then I wouldn't say I had a bad time, but I didn't have the best time in my department, and that changed my view.
Right.
So it does depend a lot, I think, on that internship period, who you're posted with, the professor, the kind of duties you get. That will really influence your decision. But work-life balance is definitely a thing, and I'm sure, especially with women who want to start a family. I know many girls who studied with me who said, "I would like to do medicine, but I want a family,
Hmm.
so I will take off that." So this is a genuine thought process that happens.
Yeah, that is
So.
what you've been hearing, and now, of course, hearing from the horse's mouth, that is very true. But if I may ask you, you take chosen obstetrics, but why many OBGYNs prefer gynae and they give up obstetrics,
Uh,
for obvious reasons. Why did you choose obstetrics, which is a very uncertain,
Stressful, chaotic,
yeah.
because I think this is where it comes, where if you like it, you really like it. That, I'm sure Gain has a better lifestyle.
Hmm.
I will say I have chosen to go to the UK to
Hmm.
do obstetrics. That might be influencing my decision, because I think the conditions are a little better. You get a
Right.
few days off in between.
Yeah.
But obstetrics is something I really loved.
Right.
I love taking care of the mom. I love when the baby came out, it was such a joyous time. OG is one of those places, especially obs, where they come to you happy, and if all goes well, they leave more happier.
Happier.
Yeah, and it's everyone is happy after that. During the birthing process, everyone is stressed, and then when the baby comes out, almost everybody is extremely happy and in a good mood, and you feel like you've done a great thing, and it's a nice environment. So that is why I liked labor room. Obviously, when things go badly, and it's probably the worst thing. But
They don't happen often.
it does not happen often. Let's be
Yeah.
real. Yeah. So it's
Amrita,
a good thing.
you've surprised me so much because you're completely opposite of what I thought the present generation is. Maybe you're an exception. You're one of the few exceptions.
No. I think there is a spectrum. There is a set of people who just don't want to work, and you really wonder then why take medicine of all things, which requires you to really be passionate. But I will think, rather than they don't want to work, they want to see if it's worth working this hard for something, and can it be done more smart. And that's how a lot of inventions happen, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people say inventions happen because people are lazy and they want to
Right.
find out how to do things easier.
Right.
I don't think it's a necessarily bad thing,
Right.
but there is a thing called work ethic, and that dedication to the patient. And I do think my generation have a lot of people who are still believe that you should have an extent of dedication to the patient. Even if you want to bunk and go for a movie, at least put someone in your place. So that at least in my set of people, I have not seen that disregard for patient health, and I hope I never see it. But definitely, kind of in terms of what are we doing this work for, and can we have more humane rotations? Can we have more better kind of work environment?
You're saying about, there are still some very good people in the present generation who think very positively.
Yes.
And you're a standing example.
Oh.
Because I'm really, really sort of impressed by your thought process, which I thought is contrary to many of the people who are from the present generation. Wonderful indeed. And on that note, Amrita, it's such a pleasure talking to you. I think the future is in good hands,
Oh, yeah.
and wishing you all the very best in your career or whatever you do. I'm sure somebody told me Amrita will become an excellent doctor,
Oh.
and she'll do very well.
That's so lovely to hear, and I'm glad I've given you a better impression of our generation, because I think we're not that bad. Thank you so much, sir. It's
Thanks.
such an honor.
Thank you.